Dr. Phil finds out the truth.
You say you've sent $225 for a passport, $1,700 for a cell phone, and $2,900 for an apartment. The car's gone, right?
Yep.
About her Nigerian fiancé.
When we came to shoot with you, you gave us the wrong address.
The confrontation.
You're a 22-year-old able-bodied man. Do you feel bad taking money from a 60-year-old woman?
On an all-new Dr. Phil. Today at 3 on CBS 2.
You're about to enter into a new world of knowledge, curiosities, and high strangeness. This is a podcast of Straight Up Strange Productions. This episode is brought to you by our Patreon supporters. Become a patron today at patreon.com/intotheportal. Northeast England, sometime in the 13th century. It was a sunny day in spring in County Durham, as John Lambton, young heir to one of the region's great estates and names, strolled casually toward the water's edge of the Weir River, as others in the community could be heard behind him, trotting along, heading the opposite direction, towards the church for regular Sunday Mass. John had ignored efforts to engage him in the fears of God, and what should have been his moments to repent. Alas, he had a passion for other things, most notably his skill with a fishing rod. And so, as the church bells rang out, John cast his line into the meandering waters of the Weir. But unlike other times when his hook would be tugged almost immediately, John waited and waited, recasting and trying as hard as he could, but nothing seemed to want to go near the young Lambton's bait. Hours passed and the skies seemed to be growing darker just as, once again, the church bells rang out, at the exact same moment that John felt a pull on the line. It must have been a giant, he thought, as he wrestled with his catch, nearly losing his fishing pole. A dark form was barely visible beneath the surface until, with a final heave, John pulled with all his might, staggering back onto the rocks, and when he looked up, all he saw was a small, grotesque, inky black creature writhing on the ground. A strange feeling came over John, and not knowing quite what to do, an old man passing by was said to have told him an omen, that something evil would come if this small creature was not disposed of. Down the well it's tossed, and 7 long years go by as John Lambton fights for his salvation in the blood-soaked Crusades, only to return to something that had not gone away. Something much, much larger. Join us on Into the Portal as we venture back to the Middle Ages and discuss theories, evidence, and folklore in search of a real monster and an even more real curse in the Lambton Wyrm, Part 2.
Hello, everybody. I'm Amber A.
And I'm Andrew McKay,
Welcome back into the portal.
your gateway to the bizarre.
We've got our part 2 all ready to roll for you guys, our Lambton Wyrm series.
Amber, you've got a certain way of saying worm.
Worm!
I don't know what it is. It's just you've got this certain roll off the tongue with
Really?
the worms.
Sounds like you can
give.
hear the Y in it versus the...
Well, we did spell it differently than I've seen others spell it, but I prefer that this sort of Old English spelling, which it just seems more, I don't know, gives it a sort of a sinister, it's like the tail of the dragon with the Y, let's call it that, or the worm, if you will.
Actually, yeah.
Well, welcome back, everybody. Part 2, Lambton Wyrm. We're digging right back into this legend, this mystery, if you will, because I believe it's a bit of a mystery and definitely not just a folkloric tale. But happy post-Halloween, first and foremost.
We hope everyone celebrated, had fun. Got a little spooky, hopefully, and carved some pumpkins at the very least, you'd hope.
I hope so, because you have to appease the spirits on All Hallows Eve.
Yeah, and people laugh, but come on, man. I think we were one of 2 people in our building that participated.
On our side of the building, anyway, it's tough to be fair, but I'm willing to wager that the other side that we couldn't see, because it's just out of the way, didn't have many jack-o'-lanterns.
Abysmal is what I'd imagine.
Yeah.
But anyway.
But I wonder what it was like where you guys are from. I mean, hit us up. Obviously, it's a strange year to maybe have Halloween, so we didn't notice a lot of kids out on the streets and stuff. We're in an apartment building, but...
Well, my mom had about 30 kids, and she lives in a 2-road town.
Damn.
And then I also talked to my boss, and he got 600 kids in his neighborhood.
And that's out in, like, Calgary or something,
Yeah.
right?
It's like one of those, like, neighborhoods where people, like, drive their kids and drop them off. It's like the Kettle Valley of whatever Calgary neck of the woods.
Every place has it. The fancy neighborhood. You go, full bars, right? The full bars neighborhoods. Well, yeah, we hope you guys all had an awesome Halloween. We watched a lot of horror movies. We didn't get through all the Halloweens or anything, but we watched a few.
I was watching more today.
Did you? Good.
On the job.
Thank you. You got to keep the good times rolling, right?
Well, when you're doing spreadsheet type work, you got to have something going in the background.
You have to have Michael Myers.
Well, actually, I watched Halloween 3, Season of the Witch, which is a very strange spin-off, and I didn't get very far. I only got about 15 minutes in before I got distracted, but it had not the classic Halloween that you were doing where it has, like, and they redid it for, like, the Rob Zombie new ones and the remakes and all that, but this had a really weird soundtrack, and it was John Carpenter that was more responsible for it, but it was weird. It was more like, like that, like, strange, like, video game vibe from, like, like an arcade game from the 70s. Anyways, it was weird.
More into, like, the mid-'80s, they were using those sounds and stuff like that.
Yeah, anyways. I think that one was from the mid-'80s, actually.
So anyway, we hope you guys got scared. We hope you watched some of those freaky movies. We were going to maybe consider doing It 2, Chapter 2 on the show as a Film Friday. Not going to happen.
Huge disappointment.
A little lackluster, so we're not even going to go there. But maybe those be some others that you guys watch for the first time. Throw them at us. Give us some suggestions, because we're going to try to get Film Friday back.
We want Film Friday back.
Yeah.
We've been actually debating. I saw on Prime, they have a new thing called watch parties.
Yes.
So I was thinking, I don't know if this will align with our U.S. listeners, though. So I'm kind of concerned about that. We have to dig into it a little bit.
We could use a proxy.
But it would be cool. We could do literal Film Friday watch parties, and then we could do, like, a fireside chat after. And that'd be so fun.
Sick. Love it.
We got to figure it out, though.
We got to figure it out. Okay. Let's get into a couple of things here. Before the Lambton, though, one more thing. We wanted to take a sec to welcome Christy to our Patreon community, who just joined us as a cryptid seeker. So thank you so much, Christy. That was awesome to see that.
Amazing. Thank you.
Some cool stuff. And actually, she ordered some stickers from the Etsy shop, too.
That was amazing.
So
I threw in we got patches in now, so I threw in a patch for her, too.
Yeah.
It's pretty cool.
So thanks a lot, Christy. And so we're looking forward to hearing some of your ideas. Cryptid Seeker does get you access to a bunch of bonus content and also some special ITP swag. So check us out on Patreon if you haven't already, so we can get closer to making this our actual day job, podcasting.
Yeah, no kidding.
Okay, let's get back to the Lambton Wyrm. Part 1 was really us getting into the legend itself and some speculations around sort of the bizarre nature of the origins of this folklore tale, with a little young Mr. John Lambton who meanders down to the River Weir on a Sunday when he's supposed to be at Mass. And of course, this is the sort of the marquee aspect of the story that makes it sort of this classic cautionary fable, Christian fable, if you will. But quick recap, obviously. He's the lord of the Lambton estate, so he's a well-to-do young man. He's fishing when he shouldn't be. He hauls out this awful putrid creature. In some accounts, he even vomits on the beach on the side of the river because it is so awful. He encounters a strange man who tells him some strange things. He has, right? I mean, it's peculiar. What would you make of any of this, right? He's not sure what to do with it.
Strange things.
He ends up throwing it down. Oh, yeah. This is in modern days, right? With the blacked out windows in the van. Like, hey, John, you shouldn't be talking to that guy. This guy was giving him seemingly good advice, right? Warns him about this creature. And then, of course, we're left off with the Lambton family cursed after John seems to ignore what's happening and goes off to fight in the Crusades, which is something we will recap in more detail and touch on as a very, very real event to try to like draw some truth into this story. So, but yeah, we left off with essentially this thing ravishing the countryside.
A lot of frenzy of some kind. Right. And it was interesting because we've been reviewing a lot of the story itself and all these different versions and how there seemed to be, like we mentioned, there was a fondness for cow's milk that this beast would seemingly be appeased with. Right. And you also mentioned that it seemed to be attacking for sport. There were bodies, like there were corpses discovered, and some of them had just been drowned and others just been torn apart but not eaten. You know what I mean? Like, right. And again, right, like a lot of the victims, like the sheep and the cows themselves too, were found in a similar state, which kind of begs the question: is it more like a beast of Gévaudan type thing, or That's right. Is it, is it something a little bit more along those lines and not?
Totally. Like we brought that up off air, and we forgot to kind of mention that in part one, just because we sort of read it as this classic, like, unlike something like The Black Shook, if you've listened to that episode we've done, where it's basically straight killing for sport, versus like a cryptid where it's like sucking the blood and the blood's gone. And it's like, well, why would it do that? That's a weird biological thing, chupacabra style or something like that. Yeah. We didn't mention that. Definitely worth mentioning. I'm glad you brought that up.
Yeah. There's all sorts of weird proclivities this creature seemed to have, including using its knife-like teeth to pierce the udders of its bovine victims, to drain them of their milk. Just their milk?
I mean, presumably milk first. You didn't want to contaminate it, and then you finish it off with the full course, I guess, the steak tartare, if you will.
The steak tartare, yeah.
But it is sort of a bizarre thing, like the milk. I tried to find some associations with that concept and evil, the devil, what is it with that? Like that seems strange, right? Because obviously infants drink milk. This thing is not an infant anymore.
That's kind of what I was thinking, was like it's a very like pure substance, right? Milk white, like, there's lots of references to that.
And this thing is the opposite of that. So it's trying to become pure.
Or or it's feeding off of the purity of You know what I mean? It's almost like an extended metaphor kind of thing. Right. And then it's growing and becoming stronger off of this milk. It is a very weird metaphor if you think about it. Yeah. Hey? Like almost like, you're saying like a baby growing as a result of the nourishment of his mother's milk versus like this beast predating on these villagers and basically usurping the milk wealth. So to speak, the milk wealth, and draining them of their
finite resources, right? Like this isn't just there's no superstore down the road to get more milk. No. So this is a serious thing. You got to make your cheese before winter because otherwise you're not going to have cheese for winter, which would just suck. But
and another aspect too that was interesting that you mentioned just before we sat down again, and I had seen this in other iterations too, but the idea of the trough that was used at the castle itself. And so this was a trough that was put out by Lord Lambton, John's father at the time. So this is after John's left. And so this would be almost like a community thing where it would be like people would just give what they could, the offerings, right? So then the beast would descend from the hill and go to the trough and get what it, I can't remember exactly. There was like a specific amount of milk that had to be in there from like a specific amount of cows. Anyways.
Right. And then there was some speculation too that they would like tie an animal to the trough as well and like leave other basically sacrificial things there. And then presumably that would be the way in which they were sort of almost baiting it for these so-called knights while John was gone that were trying to come along and vanquish this thing. And not successfully, obviously, because it continues to proliferate and grow and devour everything in County Durham.
Exactly. Yeah, because there were several references to neighboring knights that had come along and even just like brave villagers who had tried to vanquish this thing without any success. No. And it's because they don't have the secret formula from the witch. But anyways.
Yes, we'll get back to that, don't you worry.
Exactly. There's a lot to cover here, though, and what else did we want to really get into here?
Why don't we just jump straight into some of the, like, proving some stuff about the Lambtons and some of the research we did?
Sure.
So... Obviously, some of the main cruxes of this is, whether or not John Lambton did indeed exist in the way we're referring him to, go down to the River Weir and catch this strange creature. If that actually happened, then did he actually go off and fight in the Crusades, which we know was a very, very real, horrific event happening over a series of decades and decades, right? So anyway, that's all stuff we're trying to prove. And another thing I think is worth mentioning is that we didn't include in part 1 was this idea that John was potentially feeling really guilty about what had happened, like right off the bat. And he was either running away, like to the Crusades to get away from it, or going to fight in the Crusades as a way of basically making up for not going to church that day, obviously, right? Like, I missed church that day, so I'm going to spend 7 years.
7 long years.
I mean, how many other days of church did you miss? It must have been more than one, because that's definitely a...
Well, I actually did see references to John being kind of like a frivolous, sort of like not of ill character, but just of like kind of like not quite honorable.
He was a rapscallion.
A little bit, yeah, exactly. He was a scallywag.
He's a pirate now.
He is a pirate. He's going off to fight the Pirate Crusades.
The Pirate Crusades.
He was one of the sea people.
Right.
No, anyway, we're off by about 1,000 years.
Off by just a hair.
Just a hair. But yeah, no, that's interesting to bring John's character into the story again, and whether or not it was this event, the actual worm event that spawned his sort of like wanting to go, or whether or not it was something else that spurred him, that like, you know, I think it was the disappointment of his father I saw referenced in a few sources.
Ooh,
you know what I mean?
That'll do
so he
it.
just like, yeah, he was living up to the family image.
And again, I just want to reiterate too, like, the purpose of me mentioning this is that, like, in the 1300s, when someone would be feeling very guilty for not going to church and going off to fight in the Crusades and all this stuff, all of these things might take away from there being a very real creature, because it all does just get chalked up to these classic Christian fables.
Wow.
It was this, it
Not
was that.
Actually, it could go the exact opposite of what you're saying. Like even how, oh my gosh, was it the boys over at Kryptonite? They were saying that it could have been like a tulpa, so maybe it was because he felt so guilty, it did come into existence. And then
That's Mark over there saying that, I think.
Was it? Or no, wasn't it Chris?
Oh, no, that's all Mark. That's Mark Storrs.
Was it? Oh, was it Mark? Okay.
Oh, yeah. Shout out to Mark.
Sorry. I got those two mixed up.
Yeah.
But I thought it was Chris, because he's all very...
Chris is never down for that at all. I'm
true,
pretty sure Chris
he's
is...
very
and shout out to Kryptonite, because they're obviously awesome, great, amazing show. Love those guys.
Highly entertaining.
I'm pretty sure Chris's summation of this was literally just no. I think I'm pretty sure that's what he said. I listened to their episode a little while back in preparation for this as well, and I'm pretty sure that's what he said.
Just no.
Just no.
That's where I'm at a lot of times, so I don't blame him.
No, you are very much aligned with Carnicelli for sure on a lot of those things.
Carnicelli, Scully, me. Boom.
Right.
Perfect trifecta.
Someone should do a poster of the three of you as the skeptic team. Yeah. But I mean, on the other side of the skeptics, or well, maybe on the side of skeptics who are looking for real evidence, like we did manage to at least find, I mean, definitely references to John and his family, who were indeed real, and Lambton Hall is a real place.
Yeah.
It's really their accolades that are hard to distinguish, right? And very much like anything in the Middle Ages, like King Arthur and Sir Lancelot. Like, I mean, this is a little more true than that, but in the same vein, so to speak, right?
There's a little more meat on the bones.
There's a little more meat on the bones. So there was this guy, Mr. Robert Surtees. Why don't we get into that?
I think, that's definitely important to mention, because we actually reference his work in part 1, but we didn't actually mention by name, I don't believe.
No.
But he is a pretty important figure here, and he dug up a lot of information on the Lambton family, and he was basically like a local historian, folklorist, and genealogist to a large degree.
Yeah.
So he was born in 1779 in Mainsforth, Durham, and devoted himself to the study of local history, antiquities, collecting up these stories, local accounts, and things like that. A lot of it folktale related, including this one of the Lambton Wyrm. And he published 4 volumes, and it was called The History and Antiquities of the County Palatine of Durham. It still to this day is very
extensive.
It's extensive. It's very highly regarded, and it's referenced in quite a lot of other works too.
Right.
And he actually died before the last volume was published in 1840 there, but he died in 1834. And after he died, there was actually a society erected to memorialize him called the Surtees Society. And it was with the express purpose of publishing ancient, unedited manuscripts that were relevant to the local history of Durham County.
Yes.
And there are these interesting things that are referred to in various publications around this time, and he was the one that was largely responsible, along with his colleagues, of collecting these things called, what was the name of it now? It was these manuscripts. They're unnamed, but they're basically genealogy records.
Right.
Yeah. And so him and his pal, Sir Cuthbert Sharp, who we did reference, I believe, in part one, he and so he was another contemporary of Surtees, they did a lot of work gathering much of this local lore regarding this tale and of the families themselves.
Yes.
And there's another author by the name of Henderson who published in the late 1800s who we're going to reference as well a little bit further in this episode today.
Yes,
but
okay.
It's interesting because a lot of the one connection, I'll say, that these local historians and folktale purveyors had in common was a reference to this particular order known as the Order of Rhodes that existed in the medieval ages and actually in the early modern periods, actually.
Yeah, it went for a long time.
It did, and it came about during the First Crusades in the late 1100s.
Like around 1100s.
1000s. How do you say that?
1,000. The end of the thousands.
I mean, say 1000.
That doesn't roll off. It doesn't roll off the tongue like saying 1100 AD does.
I know, right?
It
You can't say that.
Or CE or whatever.
Yeah, they existed in various locations in and around the Mediterranean area, in the Near East, even on the island of Rhodes for a certain amount of time, up until the late 1800s, I believe.
Yes.
But this Order of Rhodes is interesting in relation to our story today because we have a knight by the name of Sir John Lambton. So this is significant because, why, Andrew?
Well, it's interesting because this order has its own legend of a very similar monster who is said to have terrorized the village of, the town of Rhodes with its so-called, quote-unquote, impenetrable scales and a lashing, whipping, deadly tail, and other very similar comparisons to the Lambton Wyrm and other worms of the UK, preying on livestock, pets, even allegedly young children and shepherd boys were reported missing from the area at the hands of this bizarre entity. So very much like the questions we're asking today for the Lambton Wyrm, was this creature a demon, some sort of shapeshifter, a very real biological predatorial entity of some kind taking the young? But here's where it gets interesting. And obviously the main piece here too is that Sir John Lambton, who goes off to fight in the Crusades, is associated with this order that lasted for over 500 years. And we still don't know the exact origin of the Lambton stories either. It's hard to pin down. We're talking late 1300s, but still, it's tough to pin down. Here's where this gets interesting with the Order of Rhodes. In the period after the Order of the Knights of Rhodes was founded on the island, which is in Greece, correct?
Yeah.
It was said to have been ravaged by this enormous creature that was also semi-aquatic, living in the bogs and wetlands at the foot of a place called Mount St. Stephen. This was supposedly roughly 2 miles away from the city of Rhodes, and like I already said, devouring sheep, ripping cattle to shreds when they came to drink water, and again, shepherd boys found maimed and mercilessly slaughtered.
Or just missing.
Or just gone, and you people, I guess, caught on to what was happening. Pilgrims who were actually visiting the chapel of St. Stephen had to put their lives in harm's way, it was rumored, because they may or may not have been devoured by this possible dragon before they actually had the chance to climb the hill itself. And it got to the point where, very much like Lambton, several brave knights had to make an attempt to kill this creature. But it was said to have such hard, impenetrable scales that everyone failed. And it's sort of a classic narrative, right? Archetypal hero narrative. They're waiting for the one, I guess you might say. But then, of course, there is one of the Order of Rhodes' own knights who ends up vanquishing this beast, and then allegedly its head, the very real head of a real creature, was supposedly displayed on the gate of the entry to the city, and was reported by historians as being actually seen up until the 17th century. Now, are they just replacing this head with the head of a strange-looking mangled horse or something to make it seem like, right? Or whatever? Or
this is like Oliver Cromwell's head.
The head of a... it's like Oliver Cromwell's head, but it's the head of a dragon. Yeah. You can't take a photo. You can't snap a picture. So anybody who's even drawing this stuff, it's like, wow, it's all wild speculation anyway. You could have just drawn it. Like, damn.
Could have drawn it. What do you mean drawn it? Like
if you were just there and like, I saw it. Well, prove it. Well, look, I drew a picture of it. Like you can't. There's no way to prove it, right?
So it goes around. Yeah, exactly. So it would spread quickly, and it would be hard to corroborate.
And I love how you put in here, "Da heck," like because there's not really much else to say to that. That's pretty crazy.
Well,
it was on there until the 17th century.
Yeah, there's a lot of interesting parallels to the Lambton legend. Hey. I really like this story. There's a lot that kind of adds to what we're talking about today, but it also conflates, and it could potentially be a conflation, right? If John was a member of this order, comes home after fighting the Crusades, this order came around during the First Crusades. However, this reference states that it actually moved around quite a bit. We should mention that because this particular order had several locations. Initially, when it was actually founded, it was headquartered in the Kingdom of Jerusalem up until 1291, supposedly. And then it went to the island of Rhodes. And this was in the early 1300s.
Right.
Up until the mid-1500s.
And this is where the aspect of the monster and then its creation and then John, like you just said, like it could be a little out of order or things could cancel each other out or what have you, because the 1291 time frame could potentially line up with a very real John Lambton going away for 7 years to fight in the Crusades. And that this story isn't at the end of the 1300s. We're maybe off by a little bit here, potentially. Just because some of the references to John going to fight in the Crusades claim that he goes to Palestine and like to some of these classic places. And when I looked it up for the time frame for the monster for the story in the 1300s, it doesn't necessarily line up with the Crusades in those exact places. At that time, it had been taken back control by by Islamic factions, yada, yada, yada. And then there was maybe some more battles and stuff after that. But it's just tough to line everything up with that. But I do think that John was a real person that did go away. It's just tough to say when and how and where. Yeah, you could have heard this story too.
There's some ambiguity, definitely, yeah. The interesting aspect is that he was a part of this order.
Yes.
And like this particular order and these Knights of Rhodes had their own beast that roughly does parallel a lot of what happened here. Like even
it does.
The idea of, well, they don't include the milk aspect, but maybe there wasn't a lot of cows over there.
Maybe not. Maybe it was goat's milk and we just didn't hear about it.
Maybe. Actually, no, it did say devoured sheep and cattle, so there is reference to sheep and cattle, so there would be milk around. But also the idea of these covered in impenetrable scales. That is interesting to me. The only thing that's missing in this story that I'd like to dig into further would be just how this beast was slain. Was it similar to the sort of rigmarole that John had to go through in order to slay this thing? Because he had to go through quite a bit. And, like, that thing was, like, regenerating all over the place. Like, he had to... Anyways, we got into that in the first episode here. So It was, like... There's a lot going on, so I'm curious about this Dragon of Rhodes, and quite honestly, I think he probably would have been aware of it. What do you think? What are the probabilities that he would have...
I do think so.
He could have transplanted this story. You know what I mean?
I think
or
it's
someone
like,
in his family.
Yeah, I mean, it's either that, and then it's like, I mean, why do you bring that back? It's just like, I guess maybe you're a great storyteller, you want to scare people, you want to be the purveyor of this weird legend and have it associated with you if it isn't true, and maybe John's the one perpetrating this myth, if you will, or this legendary creature. I don't necessarily know if that's true. I think being it being the Middle Ages, it being the 1300s, and just generally a horrible time to be alive for most people, and the certain things people believed and understood, I think that if anything, he would have maybe heard about it, known about these types of creatures from his fellow knights in the order and the Crusades, and when he went back, maybe believed more of what was actually happening. You know what I'm saying? So, like, he leaves not knowing what's going to happen. The countryside ends up getting ravaged by a so-called beast. Maybe he ends up learning some more about these types of creatures, goes back and then knows to go talk to the witch and is just a little bit more up to speed on the matter. I guess, like, I don't even know. Like,
he's got a little bit more knowledge about the way things are done.
And also feeling filled with the glory of God from, being on the Crusades and all this stuff. I mean, that's exactly what these guys were getting out of it a lot of the time, right? They thought they were going and doing this, the work of the Lord, right?
Yeah. Taking back Jerusalem, the kingdom of Christianity and all that kind of thing.
Right.
Yeah, no, that's an interesting point to make.
So I don't know. I honestly don't know, but it was an interesting connection to the Lambtons. That's there, and just monsters in general.
Yeah.
So it lends credence to the idea that, oh shit, maybe the poor people of County Durham and River Weir were really in tough for a hot sec there in the Middle Ages, and it's not just being afraid of the devil.
Do you find yourself suffering from negative thoughts or feelings that are getting in the way of your personal happiness and achieving your life goals? If so, perhaps it's time you check out BetterHelp online counseling services. BetterHelp.com is there for you with licensed professionals that are specially matched to you and are available worldwide and remotely, all in a safe and private online environment. Seeking help and finding the right person to talk to should be easy, and that's exactly what BetterHelp.com has done. You can begin communicating with a licensed professional in 24 hours, all through your preferred methods of communicating, including secure video or phone sessions, plus online chat and text with your therapist. You can trust that anything you share with your therapist remains completely confidential, and if you feel the need, you can change counselors at any time for no additional cost. BetterHelp has licensed professionals who are specialized in everything from depression, anxiety, family conflicts, and many other areas that may not be available locally. Best of all, it's truly affordable. Into the Portal listeners get 10% off your first month with discount code PORTAL, spelled PORTAL. So why not get started today? Join over 1 million other individuals and go to betterhelp.com/portal. Simply fill out a questionnaire to help them assess your needs and get matched with a counselor that can make a difference in your life. That's betterhelp.com/portal. So there's a lot of strange things, a lot of bizarre connections going on here. And like I already mentioned off the top of the episode, there was another one I found in another 19th century historical work called Notes on the Folklore of the Northern Counties of England and the Borders. This was by William Henderson, and it was published in around 1866. And in it, Henderson refers to many different legends involving dragons, worms, all sorts of creatures, including the Lambton Wyrm. And he also refers to the Lambtons themselves, the Lambtons, sorry, I can't talk today.
All good.
And he does refer to them as a notable family in County Durham, an ancient one of pedigree dating well before the 12th century, and having held and been in powerful positions long in antiquity. So quite a lengthy history, and one that kind of trails away, right? It's kind of one of those breadcrumbs, so you don't really know where it kind of ends.
Yeah.
But he also talked about the manor, the castle in which they lived in. The park grounds is extensive grounds, and they extend all along, I think it was the northern bank of the river? It was one of these banks, and it was just sounds like such a pleasant place, and even details how I think it was in the 1700s the old original castle from the medieval times was replaced by this new existing manor house now.
Sure, yeah.
So he's very it's not a lot of monsters all the way through, but he's very thorough, which I appreciate.
Yeah, absolutely.
But his entry in the book on the Lambton case in particular goes on to detail an account of the legends. He lays it all out very, it's very thorough again. And then he also goes on to speculate on the curse and the evidence that he and other contemporaries of his found in these old pedigree manuscripts. So this is interesting. That was what I was referring to when I couldn't think of the word.
Pedigree.
It's a pedigree manuscript.
Right.
not a genealogy, but it basically is that, right? And these are found like all over England, right? Like they're just in old trunks in people's attics, and they're just like things that have been passed down from antiquity. It's really cool.
It is really cool.
So when you find one of these, there's not a lot of like dates, there's not a lot of ways to really verify them other than using other manuscripts. And that's where the Surtees Society comes in as a very important, like, pivotal role in collecting all these and amalgamating them.
Imagine
and
the mysteries that you can find when you get cross-referencing such old, ancient things. It's very
pretty interesting. And then a lot of old relatives probably, you're like, oh, I'm related to this guy.
Yeah.
You know, because all
coming out of the worm work, pun intended.
Oh, man. But this particular pedigree manuscript that was in, quote-unquote, in the possession of a family in Middleton was actually unearthed by Sir Cuthbert Sharp. So, again, another reference to Cuthbert over there.
Indeed.
But yeah, it's interesting because this was very brief. All it did was speak of a John Lambton, Knight of Rhodes, who defeated, quote, Ye Worm. So it says here, this is just a little brief little thing, quote from the actual book. It says here, the exact date of the story, he's referring to the Lambton legend, is of course uncertain. Sir Cuthbert Sharp appends it to the following entry from an old manuscript pedigree, lately in the possession of the family of Middleton of Offerton. And it says here, John Lambton, that slew Ye Worm, was Knight of Rhodes and Lord of Lambton, after ye death of Fower brothers, which is, this is all just kind of like weird old English, sans eschew mal. Anyways, and it kind of goes on to like talk about, he goes in to speculate about these 9 ascending generations that were cursed. And we pulled up a little bit of what we were able to find on that too. So crazy though, hey? It's just another really obscure reference. And I love the way I can just picture in my head this old dusty like manuscript thing that they like unravel, and it's got all these like really beautiful archaic looking characters and things, and you have to like, anyways, it's an art putting all this together.
Absolutely. Well, I mean, yeah, people have entire, special PhDs in dealing with this kind of stuff. And part of what was unearthed in a lot of this is what we did mention briefly in part 1, but I just want to summarize here, which is the curse then taking effect. And I think that's a perfect transition because, like you said, it goes on, this paragraph you just read from goes on to address the 9 generations, so on and so forth. And it seemed to be very, very real, at least to some. And at first glance, you might not think that, but the very first death is the one that kind of kicks it off. And to me, it's like if the first death was a little bit more mundane, you might think differently. Robert Lambton, who was quite young at the time, I do not have the exact age right here, drowned at Newrig. And a lot of people drown. That's not completely ridiculous, but it's definitely not normal per se. I mean, how many people do you know that have drowned? Like, I don't know any. I mean, like it happened a lot back then. I'm sure there was no swimming lessons down at the Y, but that's definitely like.
How old was he? Yeah, was he a child?
Not an infant, but definitely like if you're a teenager or a grown man, say, you should probably know how to swim for one, but that's very curse-like to me, a drowning death. The second being Sir William Lambton, who was allegedly a colonel of foot, as it's described, and he was killed in the Battle of Marston Moor, which was a real military event. Colonel of foot, I tried to kind of figure that out. I don't have an exact definition for that, you guys. It seems to be that he was in a higher ranking command, but still involved with like foot infantry, right? Like you're a colonel your feet, I guess, like you're on your front line in it, basically.
Don't quote me on this, but I think this was happening for the second and third deaths. I think this was happening during the Loyalist Wars. I saw a reference to that, and I can't remember. There's so many friggin' wars over in England.
Oh, back in those days, it was never ending.
It was in the service of one of the kings. I think it was Edward or something. Don't quote me like that.
And of course, it's like, okay, well, you're fighting in battles, and it's not, I mean, presumably, like, a lot of people die, so, like, that's not necessarily an out-of-the-ordinary death, but nevertheless, another death. There's the third one, which is yet another William in the family, another William Lambton later on, who dies in another battle, the Battle of Wakefield.
I believe that was his son.
And the question for me is, how exactly are the deaths happening? We don't have those details. We just have they died at Wakefield. Well, did he die from like running into battle, tripping on a rock, falling face first and getting like a sharp stick through the head? Because that's definitely cursed if that's what happened.
I wish I had...
you know what I'm saying?
Yeah. Sorry, just to add to that, because I'm pretty sure this third one, the second William Lambton,
right?
I did have a little bit more meat on the bone for that, and I can't remember because I didn't.
That's okay. We can circle back to that if you wanted to check it out.
Well, I don't know. I can't remember which source that was in. It was one of the books I was reading through, but
okay.
Yeah, no, I think it was a strange way to go. It was like as if he had almost made it through the entire battle, and then it was all of a sudden just like last minute or something. But I can't remember the exact details now. Right. But it was kind of a funny one. Anyways.
Okay, yeah. Well, whatever. We can maybe circle back to that. Presumably after this, though, the succeeding generations after the third here had a little bit more luck. They were able to at least survive a little bit longer, but we still don't know how they died. Like if it was peacefully in their beds, like the curse said they wouldn't. So maybe you still died at an older age and it's like less, oh, wow, that's classic Curse of the Lambtons. But it could have still been awful. We just don't know.
True.
And it wasn't necessarily as profound to write it down. Like the ninth one, which is probably the most cursed, in my opinion. Did you have something to say on that matter?
I do, yeah. No, yeah, do you want to...
I mean, I'll just... Sure, I can
give the Cole's notes here, and then I have a connection.
Okay, great. So Cole's notes, 9th generation, Henry Lambton. He dies tragically while crossing the Lambton Bridge on June 26th, 1761, as he plummets into the water and drowns. I think
it was a new bridge, too, if I'm not mistaken. It was
great engineering, guys.
You know, it was like that overpass they did over here in Wisconsin.
Yeah.
It took like 4 months and it actually collapsed.
Yeah, crumbled.
Crazy.
Yeah.
Okay, you know what's funny? We do have quite a gap here between the third and the ninth.
Yes.
I will say this, though. In the reference, I can't remember if it was Henderson that mentioned this. I think it was Henderson in his notes on the Folklore account. And he was talking about how by the time Henry came around, everyone locally was like looking at him like... not gonna meet a good end, buddy.
Right.
And they were all looking at him like, how's it gonna happen?
And they just
so
knew
there
it was
a
coming.
lot of a weight put on this curse. It wasn't as if like people forgot about it.
And how oppressive would that be? You know what I mean? It's like if everyone in the community like believes it just as much as the family does, and it just like almost like it reinforces it as a very real thing. There would almost be this aura around the area of County Durham if people genuinely believed all this was real, of just kind of evil vibes, if you will. It definitely would not be the most pleasant place, especially in the late 1300s. Just pestilence and death and putrid streets and no like entertainment or sanitation or generally good times at all.
There was not a lot of jovial times.
You could go hang out with your sheep.
Yeah.
And watch the sunset.
If nothing bad was happening to you at that particular moment, that was a good moment. It's not like anything great was happening. Like you got like a bag full of candy for Halloween or something like that.
Candy did not exist.
Yeah. No, I can't find that. I just pulled up again that reference here. It said here, this is a quote from Henderson in his notes on the folklore of the northern counties of England and borders.
Okay.
But he says here, the violent deaths of some are recorded in history. Sir William Lambton, like you said, colonel of the regiment of foot in the service of Charles I, was slain at Marston Moor. And his son William, as gallant a royalist as his father, it's not a loyalist, a royalist, sorry, received his death wound at Wakefield at the head of a troop of dragoons in 1643. So those are two that were, described by him. Okay. And then I thought he did include here. Doesn't look as if he did include. It must have been a different reference I had pulled up there with the ninth. Oh, here, you know what? He actually did include it. Sorry. So it says here, and it was to that Henry Lambton that the old people of the neighborhood used to look at with great anxiety, marveling whether the curse would hold good to the end. Ooh. He died in his carriage crossing the new bridge at Lambton on the 26th of June in 1761. Popular tradition is clear and unanimous in maintaining that during the period of the curse, no Lord of Lambton ever died in his bed. So popular tradition is clear and unanimous, is how he states it. But he doesn't actually go on to say beyond the ones that we've already listed here.
Wow. So none of them.
Exactly. So it was of tradition, of local knowledge, that none of them died. So we just don't have those missing accounts, which is really frustrating.
The ones that could have even been the most gruesome.
Right?
Who knows?
I don't know.
Wow.
Pretty
Okay.
cool, right?
Pretty cool. Pretty cool, pretty weird, pretty dark. I mean, it is only the day after Halloween, so that's okay. I think it all fits. Mm-hmm. And I think we're ready to start to get into some thoughts and theories on what the hell is going on here.
Let's do it.
And that's a perfect segue, because the first thing I wanted to bring up is, where did this beast come from? Where did this curse come from? And was it hell itself? Because it sort of sounds that way. And of course, we've said this a million times. I'm a bit of a broken record, but just going back to the beginning, the idea of the act of John Lambton fishing, of course, skipping mass, as well as being this generally rebellious youth. Does this alone fit the motif of him being susceptible to the devil coming in and misguiding him, or misguiding John? Or maybe not the devil, that's sort of a blanket term, but an entity.
A demon of sorts.
Yes, an element, something evil, as we would say, quote unquote, right? Mm-hmm. And obviously, there's some discrepancies with there's a few discrepancies I wanted to point out here too, because I feel like there's some dubious things happening in the story with the old man, and whether or not he is indeed an old man giving John good advice, or if he's kind of just nudging it along, or if he's the one giving good advice and there's I mean, he does go to a witch, which is kind of weird too. It's like you
go later though.
But like I'm just going to skip right to that, because it's like you literally go away to fight in the Crusades because you feel bad about what's happened. You didn't go to church that day. Mm-hmm. You encountered this putrid creature that you don't really know is proliferating into this giant monster that's going to massacre the village you're from. But you come back from this godly mission, and instead, the first thing you do is go to essentially like a pagan practitioner in the woods, rather than
a priest
or someone else. And this is something that actually, like, Rob Morphy brought up in the episode on Kryptonaut. And I was like, damn, that makes a lot of sense. That's a poignant remark. Because it's like, well, yeah, you literally just spent 7 years fighting for God, his mission. And then you come back, and the only thing that you can do to deal with this is essentially go to what was at that time regarded as the devil's work. And pagans were being pushed out. It was all the symbolisms of what they would used to be depicting as, like, you know, whatever animals and different things like that, now as the gargoyles on the castles and on the cathedrals and stuff to scare people.
Mm-hmm. Well, okay, so I will say this too. Like, we were referring to this lady as a witch, but there were other references that are referred to as a sibyl, which is more of like a seer or an oracle.
Right.
So that could maybe be a different interpretation of it.
And that's just me, like, and again, like...
But that's a good point to make, though.
Yeah, and it's like, not to discriminate against witches, right? Because obviously, like, back in the day, like in, you know, the high point of the witch trials and stuff like that, it was people who were like herbalists, essentially like...
Closer to nature.
Yeah, closer to nature. Hippies, basically. They were hippies. And including people who potentially were clairvoyant or were seers, like very much like today. Mm-hmm. So yeah, that is worth noting.
I think that's actually really funny. And going back to the generally rebellious motif and the idea of the devil coming and being attracted to that, hell yeah, that's totally like, I buy that 100%.
Yeah,
it didn't take much. It literally, like, you know, back in the day, I feel like you could just, like, tie your shoes wrong and the devil's going to come after you. Or you forget to, like...
Tie your shoes wrong, yeah.
Actually, though.
Like, well,
people thought they were very susceptible to these forces, definitely.
Absolutely.
And I like that point.
Another thing, too, I had to mention, like, just to build off of that and continue on our theories here, is could those ideas we just talked about, something coming in, something taking advantage of a young, susceptible, rebellious John, have to do with the area itself and things that happened before. So I did a little pulling some research on more of Durham's history, and very much like a lot of the UK, it's pretty haunted. There's a lot of curses, hauntings, poltergeists, strange activities.
I was literally just going to say, I was like, what if this worm was John's poltergeist?
Right.
That he actually brought into being as a youth, right? Because that's generally they do get attracted to that type of energy.
I'm loving it. You're totally vibing off what I'm leaning at here, because could this quote unquote sort of what is perceived to be a real entity that had attacked livestock and then cursed the Lambton family be a part of some sort of like continued haunting or something of this, like something like this. Because obviously this is the Middle Ages as well, and it's just constant death, like non-stop. The mid-1300s was the height of the bubonic plague, the Black Plague. It would have been, we talk about haunted houses and places where massacres happen being like, where the veil is thin for things to creep through. Yeah. This would definitely be that case. Like,
it that timeline's a little too far though, because the Crusades ended at the end of the 1200s.
True. I'm just saying that like we still don't know when. I know that, but we were talking about John in the early Crusades potentially, or in the mid Crusades, and then this story is talked about as like either the 1300s, possibly early. Like that's just it. We don't actually know the dates. I mean,
but you can just declare the dates of the Crusades because we know definitively when those
happen. Yeah, those are the ones we can only work with as definitive dates.
And if we rely on the story's narrative that says John went away to fight in the Crusades, that means the story has to be within that timeline of when the Crusades occurred. So this is a little too late.
I guess what I'm trying to say with this is like, even before this, then it's like, okay, early 1300s UK wasn't exactly a nice place full of life and love and awesome stuff.
No, I know that. Yeah,
so that's all I'm trying
building up to the big.
That's all I'm trying to hammer home here, because there's obviously these other like associations with this. The well becomes infected by this creature when John throws it in. That's a interesting aspect to it, unless it's literally just a vile creature that's like decaying down there, but it doesn't, it grows. Because there was we didn't include this in part one either, like the idea of people then continuing to drink from the well after John leaves, and they're getting violently ill, they're getting sick, they have these horrible symptoms because of the black inky substance that was secreted from its skin on the riverside.
That sounds like a weird, like, what does that remind you of? Like almost like a squid, like, you know what I mean? Like when, or like aquatic things, like squid-like things are emitting whatever. Yeah. Or what if it's literally the rotting limbs that have been chopped off and that it regenerated because it's been attacked so many times? Or maybe it's all the rotten, putrid, like just bodies of all the things that it's killed, and it just like has all this like this massive pit of rotten corpses and things, and what I mean? I don't know.
The other thing
that reminds me of, sorry, this reminds me of the Elisa Lam, the whole, like, when people were drinking out of that
not
water
nice.
Tank, and that water was, like, brownish black.
Not nice.
So rotten shit. Just rotten things. Sorry.
Hey, I already dropped. All right. It's all good. The other thing I wanted to point out, though, 9 holes on the head of the creature that were pointed out in the description, right? We talked about there being 9 holes on the sides.
Yeah.
9 generations of curse. Just sort of a funny,
Yeah, actually.
Just sort of coincidence that's sort of interesting. And then this question of who applies the curse? How does this curse actually come about? Because if this is either a real creature, which we're going to get into in a sec, great, but how does it curse the family then? If it's an entity taking advantage of a situation, that's the curse already in and of itself. It doesn't then apply a curse to the rest of the family if John doesn't do a certain thing. So is it the witch that applies the curse? Or is she just reporting it?
I kind of the mind that this creature is not just a straight monster, right? It's some sort of magical element associated with it as well. And the curse itself, I believe, was set as soon as John pulled it out of the river. So the creature is the curse itself, but then if you don't deal with your problems in the right way, you're going to be cursed for a lot longer of a time. I think is the analogy you can draw from that, right?
Sure,
deal with your problems early and they don't get that big, and then you have a massive problem to deal with. And if you don't deal with that problem correctly, then you're going to have a huge windfall for 9 generations. If you think about it like that, you know what I mean? Like, because if he didn't slay the worm, then it would just go on, right? For endless amounts of time.
Right.
Until, like, you know what I mean? Like, what if... Okay, this is an interesting question, actually. What if the curse itself... It is beset on the Lambtons, but it's more so John's curse that he is basically successive generations inherited.
Yeah.
But what if John never got a chance to kill the worm, and he ended up dying before that. And
then what?
You know what I mean? I'm curious, because we never actually see in the story, like, John was the only one that could have killed it, like, the one kind of thing, you know what I mean? But it almost seems that way, unless it's literally just because he's the only one that takes the time to go and see
get the advice of the of the seer
of the oracle, the witch, or whatever.
And then they design that special armor with the spikes.
Yeah,
right?
There's a lot of different angles you could take with that, but I am of the mind that the curse, the worm itself, is a physical manifestation of the curse.
Yeah. Okay.
And then if you don't kill it the right way and deal with it in the right way, then that's when you, like I said, you get this massive windfall.
So that's like the second cautionary tale in this.
It's almost like the conclusion. It's like the act 4.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Deal with your problems.
Yeah,
Take out the trash early before it starts to stink.
Because he didn't. He just went ahead and left. That's not dealing with your issues, man.
Right.
And, you could even look at that. Like, did he leave because he felt guilty? Or did he leave because he was already someone in need of redemption and the worm was just the final straw? And he was like, this is the last sign I need from above here. So I'm going to pack my bags and go fight in this holy war and see what I can make myself.
And see what I can make of myself.
Actually, no.
I'm going to go see the world.
I don't know.
I mean... Yeah, okay.
There's so many. What do you think about that?
I feel like that's not my best segue, but I feel like we should just really get into some real creature potential.
Really? Well, there's so many. Before we get into the real creatures, we have to discuss whether or not this could just all be folklore.
Okay, sure.
Right? Because there are other very similar beasts of legend.
Other ones.
And there are more than 20 of these folktales. Like, I would range more like in the 50s to 100 ranges probably.
Oh, sure.
But these all come from this like northeastern England, Scotland area. Many of them obviously include this dragon-like worm motif. And it's always wingless, right? Which is kind of weird because you think of a dragon as having wings of sort, but
we do now anyway.
Well, exactly, yeah. But it's very interesting because, like the Dragon of Rhodes or the Worm of Rhodes or whatever you want to call it, and like the Lambton Wyrm, they are beset upon a village or a region, and this is something that terrorizes them for many, many years before it is eventually slain. So yeah, there's all these. I'll mention a few here off the girt worm of Sherwood Wood.
Oh, the girt worm.
Shervage Wood, which I'm probably totally mispronouncing.
I don't even think that's your fault.
It's like meritage or meritage. Anyways, there are actually Scandinavian examples too, and some from Ireland. But they do tend to cluster around this area that we mentioned, Durham County, northeastern England, that type of thing.
Yeah, for sure.
There's also a really well-known Linton Worm. This one is actually from Scotland, so this is from the 12th century. And again, it was said to roam lands in search of its prey, whether that be human, livestock, or whatever other convenient thing happened upon. Mm-hmm. And it was, quote, in length 3 Scots yards and bigger than an ordinary man's leg, in form and colour to our corn. Or to our calm, sorry.
Man, some of these old...
What is a calm?
I'm not sure.
That was from the Scots clan, so...
Yeah,
they got their own English going on.
It's a little bit strange, isn't it? But
great.
I love the timelines of this, right? Like, that's what's interesting to me. It's almost sort of like, well, okay, maybe... Well, what if there were some entities like this that did happen to exist in very small numbers that were predatory, that happened to be similar to creatures that do exist there, that we will reference in a sec. I mean, 12th century, same idea. Mm-hmm. Yes, you're scared of serpents because you're Christians mostly, but also if you see one, it's going to be, if it's out of place, it's out of place. So it's like, what's a worm monster? Right? Like, what's a worm monster?
And just
to these people.
Something without arms or legs.
Where are their arms and legs? It's not okay. All right.
I forgot to mention the sockburn worm.
Ooh, the sock.
There's not really anything to mention other
does
than
that
the fact
worm
that it exists.
And that worm, what does it do? Wrap around your ankles and just rub them mercilessly until you have a really raw ankle? A sockburn worm. That's a terrible pun. I'm sorry, everybody. That's I had to. I'm not even. Okay. I mean, I got my dad jokes lined up already,
right.
Don't I?
Okay.
Okay.
Well, before we move into like things that may or may not actually exist, Well, actually, this one, I was kind of confused when you brought this up. I'd never heard of a lindworm before.
Yes.
And I thought you were talking about an actual real thing, but supposedly this is not something that is actually being discovered.
Well,
cryptozoological in origin.
Depending on who,
or nature,
it's been discovered to those who have seen it.
Okay.
But of course, those people they don't often work for the institutes cataloging such things or taking specimens of things. But no, the lindorms, it's actually lindorm, which essentially are worm-like creatures. Lindorm. That's it's the Swedish word for dragon. And the reason this has come up in association with the Lambton legend is, of course, because of the general description of these creatures being essentially wingless, legless, but still dragon-like, massively strong snake, dragon-like monsters. And I'm just going to kind of paraphrase this just from a paragraph from Cryptozoology A to Z from Lauren Coleman. So yeah, Swedish word for dragon, a creature which in the 19th century, Scandinavia was believed to be very, very real, and indeed still does to this day, depending on who you're talking to. And it was something that people would encounter in the countrysides, especially near marshes or bodies of water. Yeah. So very much similar to what we're dealing with today. In an 1885 book on the subject, a scientist and folklorist named Gunnar Olaf Heitlin Cavalus, he collected over 48 first-person accounts of such a creature. One of them even being from a member of the Swedish Parliament at the time. Okay. Half of the accounts claimed multiple witnesses. The lindorms are described as 10 to 20 feet in length. The body of a lindorm is thick as a man's thigh, so pretty massive, black in color with typically a yellow flamed belly. It was described as having a flat, round, or squarish head, a divided tongue, like many snakes we know of, and a mouthful of white, large, sharp teeth, and a heavy, unwieldy nature overall. But a stubby tail at the end, and apparently massive hypnotic eyes as large as saucers. And very much like the Lambton Worm we're talking about today, described as very aggressive, very powerful, but very snake-like too. It would hiss and contract its body and lie in wait for its prey. It goes on to say some other stuff, including that it would emit an overwhelmingly foul odor as a part of one of its biological things that it would do, and encounters terrified witnesses and for years afterward. So there was early PTSD associated with these creatures.
Like the head shape sounds similar too, like that salamander-like head, but obviously no reference to those 9 openings or anything like that on either side, maybe.
No, but I'm glad. I mean, you brought up interesting. So those were spotted all over, like Norway, Scandinavia. There's German accounts as well. Obviously, we've made reference to a alleged monster in southern Europe on the islands of Greece. That's getting into more potential sea monster territory too. But weird. It makes you wonder if Mr. John Lambton could have been dealing with what was believed all the way into the 19th century and still today to be very real cryptozoological phenomena that are quite aggressive. And did potentially exist in Europe. I mean, climate. Who knows what things where they could have been at that time, though.
No, yeah, that's actually in parts of Europe and parts of Asia. That's a little bit more on the nose than this next one I'll mention here, and I'm just going to scoot this one right up to the top here.
Sure, we're talking snakes, so.
Well, yeah, because this is going to sound maybe a little bit silly to some people, but there is a cryptid creature known as a mysterious giant snake of North Africa.
Right.
And this is something that I wasn't really aware of. Snakes have been discovered. They're not cryptid creatures, but there have been several accounts of these giant snakes that actually resemble a lot of these giant predecessors that actually did exist millions of years ago. So we're talking like times of the dinosaurs here. No joke. There's actually legit fossilized skeletal remains of massive snakes. This is in the Mali area. It extends all the way from Mali till Egypt. These accounts of these encounters with these snakes, but also the legit fossilized skeletal remains in Mali. So some of the records of these encounters with these giant snakes date to the Roman age, but some are actually quite modern as well.
Right.
And it's interesting because the latest reports actually come from people you'd think know what they're talking about.
Okay.
Paleontological researchers. And this was made in the north of Morocco. So, interestingly, there's been vertebrae, there's been a jawbone discovered in Mali that allegedly belonged to a very large snake. Okay, I'm going to butcher this name here. But it's been proved to be one of what they call madtisoids.
Okay.
And
right.
it's been given the name Gigantophis garstini.
You know at the start of that name what it's going to be. Large.
Gigantic. Exactly. Yeah, exactly. So this was calculated to be somewhere in the length of 11.7 to 18 meters
18
long.
meters.
That's 60 feet. That's a lot.
That's freaking massive. So, like, I mean... sorry, go continue.
Go on.
Well, I was just going to say, like, I mean, I'm pretty sure, like, most... like even pythons or whatever, like snakes today that get to ridiculously massive sizes are only pushing like 7 meters or something.
I know, and I actually didn't pull up those just reference points so that we could do the comparison.
I have a couple this is super basic, but like even, okay, I just pulled it up. So like a reticulated python, one of the largest snakes in the world, 7.67 meters, one of the largest on record, weighed 158 kilograms.
Okay,
so this is like
half
not even half.
Yeah. It's interesting because of its enormous size, scientists believe that this ancient snake that did exist in millions of years ago type times must have been semi-aquatic.
Millions of years ago type times. I love that very specific on-the-nose dating that we're working with here. This is the Into the Portal dating system. Yeah, we'll have a rubric at the bottom in the notes so you can follow.
But because it was so large, they thought it must have been semi-aquatic at the very least because it would have basically been crushing its lungs and other organs under the weight of itself. Like, it's this massive trunk of a friggin' animal here.
Even with the oxygen levels being different back then. It's crazy.
I don't know.
Right?
This is what the experts are saying, not me.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Well, it's not an exoskeleton, so that makes sense, I guess. It's just a big-ass, heavy thing.
I don't know, man. I don't know how all this stuff works, but it's interesting because this is a very real ancient snake, but this isn't something that would have existed in medieval times, in John Lambton's era. This wouldn't have been something that's supposed to have existed today, and there are sightings that are reported.
Interesting.
So are these misidentifications? We don't know. But because some accounts say it may have been possible that this Gigantophis, as they refer to it as, may have survived in about 40,000 to 25,000 years ago during the Holocene era.
Okay.
But it could have been maybe less than 10,000 years ago. So there's like all these kind of like varying opinions on when this could have potentially died out, because obviously we have these very few piecemeal remains that only provides such a minuscule part of the whole snapshot of this whole species, right?
Oh, totally. That's so fascinating.
So isn't that interesting though?
It is.
I just had to pull that up because I was just thinking, I was like, this is a stretch obviously, but if John had made the journey, he was, in the Crusades, he could have seen something like this, or vice versa. What if, like, during a period of warming, because there were periods of warming that occurred in around the medieval times, oh my gosh, the Middle Ages, I don't know what I'm saying here.
You just said
it. I can't decide what I want to say, usually. It's like, I try to say both of them at the same time.
Yeah, well,
my brain, it's like the left brain and right brain just going, having a little whatever. But
it's like your brain's from the Middle Ages right now.
Maybe.
It's just like how it would have been back then.
Yeah.
Just
straight confusion.
Just guy yells at sheep.
What?
I'm just kidding.
What I'm doing
I'm
here.
just kidding. Okay, continue.
I was thinking about this and I was like, what if somehow, this is a friggin' reach and a half here.
Okay, I like
what
reaches.
if somehow one of these giant ancient snakes, or some of them, managed to make their way up to England in the UK during, when they said...
Right.
You look at the geography and you're like...
Why?
Amber. Like, what are you talking about? It's a joke, but, I don't know. I had to throw it out there, because I was like, in my head, I was thinking about it, and I was like, well, or what if some of these things were found and then brought by humans up and then unleashed into the wilds of England? They probably wouldn't survive the winters, though, I'd imagine. I don't know.
Well, that's the thing. I mean, that's what makes it...
I have to look into it a little bit more.
Right? I mean, it's tough to say, though. It's like, okay, there is that connection. I'm so glad you said it, because Crusades, going through parts of Asia, through North Africa, all kinds of different places, encountering creatures they would have never seen before. And definitely part of what the Crusades were doing weren't just going in there and starting shit and slaughtering people, basically. They were stealing stuff, but they were also taking things, collecting things, and all that kind of thing. Pillaging. Is what they were doing. And also and presumably also just things of interest, which would have been animals they hadn't seen before. Yeah. Just like the Romans and stuff, bringing the lions up and doing their thing. They're saving
it for the people of God, right? So,
sure.
You gotta make sure you do
that. So maybe actually that actually makes sense. So maybe the reason for trying to bring back some sort of a monstrous snake-like entity would be for the opposite effect, to basically be like, we've caught the devil himself, and we can parade that around as a triumph of the Crusades to the masses, right?
Yeah, you never got any historical accounts of the Pope being presented with something like that. Could you imagine?
That would presented the head of the basilisk, basically. I mean, that's kind of like what we're talking about here, is like giant, monstrous, armless.
Doesn't turn you to stone, though.
Doesn't turn you to stone, but it did have some other similar things, like it's regenerative. I can't talk right now either. Regenerative. Oh my god, we both can't get out. Oh man, Andrew needs another glass of wine. Jeepers. Okay, but just that was an aspect to the creature, though. Like, it's getting, John wears his suit of armor that he gets recommended by this seer in the woods or wherever. It tells him to basically put every spike he can find on it. Yeah. When the thing wraps around him, it's getting severed apart. He's covered in its goo and ooze and nastiness from it being ripped apart as it's wrapping around him. And then it's regenerating itself at the same time. But it couldn't quite at that point where John reaches the level where it's weak enough to then obviously at least try to slay the beast or whatever, right? But it did have regenerative. Here I go again.
Oh my gosh.
This is going to be one for the ages on Into the Portal. But there's over 25 species that can regrow limbs. Okay. Giant salamanders being one of them, which are very real species in Japan and I think a few other places. These things are freaking huge. Yeah.
They're not instantaneous regeneration.
No, they're not instantaneous regeneration, but it is still regeneration.
It's more like the Leonard Betts style regeneration from X-Files.
It takes a hot sec. So could it have been something that just had this ability, that was a very real creature?
That was very, very angry.
That was predatory and angry and large?
I don't know. We do have a few different options here that we've kind of pulled together that might speak to something that could be a real zoological phenomena. Yes. I did pull up one here. It was, I put in non-brackets in quotes here, giant European eel, because I'm not actually sure who's calling these things giant, because they're not actually that big. But I guess if you saw an eel that was a meter long, you might call it a giant eel. I don't know. I probably would think that thing was pretty big, but...
Yes, you would. You would freak out.
Yeah, these things actually exist, though. European eels, they are now referred to as a modern-day critically endangered species. Yeah. So could the Lambton worm be one of these things? And it's interesting, you look into the lifespan or life cycle, I guess, of these European eels. Yeah. And they do go through various metamorphosis stages that are kind of interesting, and it kind of reminded me of a little bit of Freaky Deaky Dutch kind of stuff going on, but it really isn't. It's literally they're born as these little weird, not tadpoles, but they're born as little babies, little baby eel things, and they take on a very lengthy migration actually, and they do go through this strange transparent fish form. So they turn into fish, but then they turn back to eels. Weird. And then it's these weird transparent looking fish, which is kind of strange.
See, but this is a perfect example of a real biological function happening that we can see. That's a creature that lives in the River Wear in the UK that is almost that's very strange. You know what I mean?
It is kind of cool. Yeah.
And it makes you wonder, what else could have been much larger and in smaller populations that could have been more, I guess, the semi-aquatic at this point. These things are fully aquatic. The creature we're talking about today slithered its way on land and became a terrestrial terrorizer.
Yeah, exactly. And like I said, like, unfortunately, these things don't get very big, like about a meter long, so it's unfortunate, unless it was a genetic monster, but, you know.
But it makes sense of something he would have pulled out of the river.
That's what I mean, yeah. So that could maybe explain something he might have pulled out of the river, but not the whole shebang.
Not the whole shebang. No, for sure. We did mention in part 1, obviously, eel pies, and eel being a prominent aspect of British culinary things.
These European eels in particular are
this species of them, sure. There was a few other things that I wanted to just list here that could have been pulled out of the river or seen in the river that just made sense for it to be like monstrous, but at the same time, I mean, he was an avid fisher, Mr. Lambton, so he would have presumably maybe caught some of these things or seen them before, but this was just from like a general article on just creatures in British waterways. There's pikes, which are extremely ugly, nasty looking fish. Apparently they can get up to 5 feet long and they have super razor sharp teeth. It's over 5 million years old and has evolved to ambush its prey. So these are at least aspects of this creature that we've been talking about. Aggressive, it's definitely freaky looking. There's also like other weird vertebrates, the oldest which being the lamprey. Now, we've referenced the lamprey before, I think in our death worm episode, because it looks a lot like the death worm. Yeah. These things are so freaky. And they obviously have long eel-like bodies, massive teeth. They're monstrous looking. So
it's it almost looks like a shark's mouth, but even more teeth, like layers of teeth in a circular arrangement.
Yeah, they're unlikely to attack humans, but they do sometimes. They can grow to over a meter long, and they exist in the UK. Well, maybe we're dealing with some sort of a mutated version of this or something, right? Lastly, just of note here, catfish, which we know can get massive in the U.S. and people go what's it called?
Catfishing.
Yeah, I mean, they go catfishing. There's a special, like, noodling or something it's called, where basically you use your hand to do it. Yeah, so you're not using a fishing line. You're just go sticking your hand under a rock and noodling in there and getting a fish to clamp onto your hand. And some of these things allegedly have pulled people under and drowned them because these fish weigh hundreds of pounds more than the humans that are trying to take them down.
They're winning the battle.
They're winning the battle. Apparently there was one pulled out of a Norfolk waterway that weighed 122 pounds and was 7 feet long.
Oof.
So there's definitely some monstrous things size-wise in these waterways that are very real. We've referenced things that this monster did that are also very real, like it regenerating its body parts, very much like salamanders or geckos and all kinds of different things. But I do like your suggestion too, like of just potentially it being species brought back, and it's just that again, it's kind of a classic cautionary tale too. Like, you don't know what you're dealing with. This isn't from where you're from. You probably shouldn't bring that massive African crocodile back that you took 3 days to catch with like 40 Crusaders because you thought it would be cool or something like that. I don't know.
There were some people that had actually suggested that a crocodile or serpent could have been brought over by storms or currents from Africa.
Interesting.
So again, maybe it's not the cryptid giant snake that I mentioned, but maybe it's an actual crocodile or something crazy that's come over because of a massive storm system or whatever. Or like I said, these warming periods that may have brought species up farther north.
Interesting.
And then maybe died out now in modern times, right? Because we had a cooling period after that.
And they just got a real liking to milk. They just took a real liking to milk.
Yeah, that's weird. The dairy aspect is a little strange.
The dairy aspect is just bags of milk.
Yeah, I had a couple of fun... Actually, no, just the one here that I wanted to pull up too, the Moroccan worm lizard. And there's no real things to talk about other than the fact that it has a worm lizard. Like, you know what I mean? Like, it's a worm and it's a lizard. Like, come on. Pick one lane, man.
Pick a side.
But yeah, definitely not big enough. It is endemic to Morocco, but it's still kind of a fun idea.
I like it. It is a fun idea. Tough to pin down. Tough to pin down something real.
Yeah.
But it still reads that way to me in some regard.
There's something there.
There's some precedent here. We really tried to flesh it out. Pun intended again. with the severed flesh of the beast falling off of the armor of Mr. John Lambton. But yeah, I mean, my final thoughts on this is just that. I mean, I just said it basically. I think that back in the day, there was an opportunity for a lot of these things that could have been very real to slip through the cracks and just become a part of what we see as pure folklore nowadays, because it was impossible to document it to the effect that we would be satisfied with today. And also, the people then would have been seeing it in a certain light and possibly documenting it, if they did, in a way that we would then read in the very much the same way as you're influenced by your Christian morality and you think you're seeing the devil when actually you're just crazy, or other things like that. The only other thing I wanted to just hit on to finish it all off was the idea of it being, I do actually think and believe that it's possible that it could be very much a real curse, very much a real physical entity that basically just latched onto John because of something else that was happening. It became this story about not going to church, but maybe, Mr. Lambton had been doing something else that he shouldn't have been doing, worse than just skipping mass. And that that combined with the area being rich in history of both like witchcraft, hauntings, all kinds of crazy stuff, definitely before the 1300s, could have like played into the development of this creature, this entity.
Interesting. I feel like you could even go the opposite way, where you could say like perhaps the Lambtons themselves were just had some serious bad luck. Right, and then people almost dreamed up the legend to explain this lineage of bad luck. They had to have a reason, yeah. Not that we have an extensive catalog of what that bad luck may entail, but, we do have a lot of reference to it.
We do know that the people there knew about it, though.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So we just might not have had that all recorded, unfortunately. Who knows?
Not the best era for reporting. We'll just never know. Well, we would love to hear what you guys think. Are we dealing with a real monster, a demon in monstrous form, a creature from the beyond, a massive ancient snake brought back from the Crusades? What?
Just an amalgamation of a bunch of threads of folktales, or what?
Or I don't know. What? Who knows? So yeah, definitely hit us up. Comment on hit us up on Facebook, leave a comment, or send us an email if you don't like public comments into the portal mailbox at gmail.com. We'd love to hear your thoughts and ideas. And definitely follow us on Instagram at Into the Portal Podcast. If you don't already, Facebook is the same at Into the Portal Podcast, or Meta now. Weird. I don't know. It's called that. I haven't seen the change. Apparently that's a thing. Yeah. I don't know. Again, we haven't posted on TikTok yet, but we're out there under at Into the Portal, so you can follow us there as well. And please don't forget to rate, review, and subscribe to the show on Apple Podcasts or wherever you listen to Into the Portal. It really helps us out. And I had this thought that we used to read out some reviews and we kind of stopped doing that. But if we get some awesome 5-star ones, I would totally want to give you guys some shout outs. So maybe we could do like a 5-star, like a 5-star Friday or something when we do like our Film Fridays back in action or something, and read out some cool 5-star reviews from you guys. Maybe we'll start
chucking out some patches, and we got some
patches we'd love to totally. Yeah, if you guys do that, we'll definitely hit you up with some stuff for sure. And lastly, thank you so much to our producers of the show, Adam Kellums, Nightwing, Kitsune, Jackson Greenberg, and Molly the dog. And to all of our other Patreon supporters, thank you guys so much for contributing to the show and making this a possibility. And thank you to all for listening as well.
Yes, we love and appreciate all you fine folks out there in the world. And,
yes, we do.
And I hope, again, this is November 1st. We're heading into the dark season. Ooh. And I hope everyone just had some revelry last night just to kind of wind down fall, even though it is technically still fall, but you know what I mean.
Yeah, we do. It's post-October.
I'm kind of mourning Halloween right now. I took down the Halloween decorations earlier and I was like, I'm not ready for this.
I was surprised they were down when I came home, to be honest. Maybe we'll have to get them back up. Halloween year round. All right, you guys. Well, thank you so much for listening to this episode of Into the Portal.
Your gateway to the bizarre.
This podcast is a part of Straight Up Strange Productions. Discover more shows like this one at straightupstrange.com.
After all we've all persevered through, there's nowhere better to find your happy place again than one happy island, Aruba. Aruba's pristine beaches and perfect weather will revitalize your body and spirit. With direct and convenient flights from most major U.S. gateways, Aruba is an easy breezy escape. And rest assured, the health, safety, and well-being of its visitors and locals is the island's #1 priority. Find your happy place on the island with the most sunny days in the Caribbean. Plan your happy escape today at Aruba.com.